Congresswoman, welcome back to the program. You told us last time we spoke that if polls show you can win, then you would run, but there isn't a single public-facing poll that shows you beating any of the three Republicans. So what do the internal polls say, and where do you see a path to victory?
Yeah, so we do have internal polls. I don't like to necessarily show my hand, but I wouldn't jump into this large of a race just because. So I will say that confidently, we do have polling that shows me ahead. But so as to not give a specific candidate anything to talk about, I'd rather not. It just doesn't make sense. Listen, this is not a game of checkers. This is a game of chess. But I am telling you confidently that I have polling that shows that. But more importantly, Jason, you and I have talked a lot about expanding the electorate and looking at the elections that we're seeing, just like yesterday, where there was a flip in Georgia, which is down south, just like seeing down in Miami, where they flipped a seat that had been red for the last 30 years. I am telling you that what we need to do is we need to energize people and give them someone that they can believe in to be their fighter, someone that they know to be their fighter. And according to our polling, we were able to excite that very coalition that we would need to not only just have what the general poll is saying, but maybe even expand those numbers a little bit in case the general polling is a little off, which we've seen here and there, specifically in the state of Texas.
You announced your candidacy with an hour left before the filing deadline. Why wait until the last minute?
Yeah, so there were a couple of things about this. You know, this was a very difficult decision, as I stated at that time. In addition to that, if I was going to file, I needed to know what the Supreme Court was going to do. So the Supreme Court only told us a couple of days prior to the end of filing. If there was anyone that started to really mess us up in the state of Texas, it was definitely the Supreme Court, because we didn't even have those lines. And I'll also tell you that most people started talking about me potentially being in this race when I did an interview on Sirius XM. And in that interview, Laree, she was asking me about the redistricting. She asked me about the Senate race. And I said to her, if they want to snatch House seats, I may have to snatch their Senate seat. Listen, I want people to know that this race is bigger than just this particular race, is bigger than Texas, but also think about those down ballot races that now they're saying, listen, we've got 5 seats that were taken. But if Democrats continue to swing at the rates that we've been swinging, which is no less than a 10-point swing, then they may have thought that they were doing the Republicans a favor, but they may have been doing them a disservice. And if you have a candidate that can bring out so many more Texans, I think that we may be able to actually even get over the Supreme Court. And so I took all these things into consideration. I also wanted to try to work because there were candidates, as I said very publicly, that I thought would be great assets potentially to the ticket because of their fundraising prowess, because of their name ID, because of a specific demographic that is very close with them to the extent that they have a rapport and would actually come out specifically for them. And so I was engaged in those conversations. up until the last minute, trying to see if I could figure out what we could do to give Texas its best shot.
People know you as a fighter, but let's talk about policy for a moment here. If you were to win and represent Texas in the Senate, what are the top 2 issues you would pursue?
Yeah, so for me, it's definitely going to be voting rights. I definitely got to make sure that I throw that in there, but it's housing and it's immigration. So I'm going to lay out why it's those 3, and then we'll move on. So number 1, voting rights, that's where we get the opportunity to have our representation. And it is clear that we've been thrown into chaos with the chaos leader that we have because we did not have in place a Voting Rights Act like historically we had the Voting Rights Act, which had been signed into law by LBJ. That's number 1. So when we're looking at, will we get the health care that we need? Will we get access to the education that we need? Will we get access to someone who will listen to the needs of the people? We have to make sure that we're going to be fair about the lines that are drawn. So I think you don't get anything without fair lines. And so that's why voting rights would be number 1 on the list for me. Number 2, though, would have to be housing, because right now people are hurting. Our economy is struggling right now. And so when you're looking at things like, am I going to be able to buy a home? In fact, when we look at the 24 election, we know that most young people were saying, I can't afford to buy a home. And if you can't afford to buy a home, then you can't start to build that generational wealth. So as we start to talk about this wealth gap and how it's widening, there's so many layers to this, but this is how you build that generational wealth. In addition to kind of like dovetailing on that, and we're us talking about the fact that there is this widening gap, you've got to talk about the fact that I actually want to raise the minimum wage. I think it's necessary. So when you're talking about whether or not the state of Texas or just the country in general is going to be in a better position to be solvent, what we need to do is make sure that you don't have working folk that, as we saw during the shutdown, were having to line up and go and try to get food from a food bank. These are working people. People saw the images. So right now we have so many corporations that are getting away with not paying a livable wage to their workers and getting tax cuts from us. And we're having to supplement and help their workers. That doesn't work for anybody. That is fiscally irresponsible. And then finally, immigration. I just don't think that you can talk about the state of Texas and not talk about immigration. Now, here's the reality. The plurality of people in the state of Texas are Latino. The reason that I bring that up is because whether you support the immigration policies that were laid out, which are not currently being carried out, something completely different is being carried out. We know that there are people that are telling us every single day. In fact, I had a hearing in the Senate just yesterday. So on my first day back, I had my first hearing in the Senate, which is kind of serendipitous, but nevertheless. So we had a joint hearing and we heard from 5 U.S. citizens. They are all of, not all of Latino descent, but the vast majority of them were. Yeah. And they were talking about what had happened to them. They had talked about being shot at. They had talked about being incarcerated. And it was all because of the color of their skin. So regardless as to whether or not they believe that we should be stronger on immigration, what's happening right now, violating people's due process rights, that is something where people are being racially targeted. And I think that you can't run for this type of seat and not address that when 41% of the state is Latino.
You're well known among Democrats. You're popular with progressives. Probably less so, though, with Texas independents. And those independents, as you know, though, lean conservative here in this state. What's your plan to go meet them?
Yeah, listen, I think you just talk about the real issues. I mean, you can decide that you're going to vote for a DRR because it's just kind of what makes sense, or you can decide that you're going to vote for somebody that understands the struggle of the farmer and the rancher, or what it is to live in rural Texas, because that's actually where I began my political career, was in East Texas, where I still own property. And so I know what it is to wake up and smell the paper plants. I know what it is when there's a threat about shutting down the tire plant. I know what it is when you don't have those specialists right there in your area and you have to travel to Dallas to go see a specialist. So I understand these things. I always have. And so I think engaging in conversations that matter, whether we're talking about the fact that there's a lack of access to healthcare, or whether we're talking about the fact that there is a record number of bankruptcies that are being filed by our farmers, or whether we're talking about the fact that in the state of Texas, we do trade big. And right now with these tariffs, that is hurting so many businesses, especially our small businesses, or whether we're talking about the fact that you don't know how it is that you're going to pay for your child to go to college. And right now we have a Department of Education that is making it more difficult for you to get those funds. And instead it's becoming a matter of the haves versus the have-nots. And so I think having these real conversations, talking about making sure that people have access to capital to start their own businesses, making sure that people aren't being told, oh yes, you can get into a home so long as you sign a 50-year loan in which you'll pay some ridiculous amount of money over that time. I think we should just focus on the issues. And at the end of the day, I think that we'll find that we have more in common than not. The last point that I'll make is that I received an email specifically from a man. I looked at it this morning, and I think I'm going to keep looking at this email from Mark. And this was an email from a man named Mark that lives in Texas, and he was asking me to run for Senate. So this is prior to me getting in the race. And Mark told me about the fact that he had historically been a Republican, and he just can't bring himself to call himself a Republican nowadays, but that's who he is. And he told me that he doesn't agree with me on a lot of issues, but he said, we need your leadership and your clarity in this moment because the Republican Party has lost its way. I think there are more marks out there than not. People that see through the nonsense and recognize that people are weaponizing these labels and trying to make people be scared of me. But at the end of the day, I'm a Texan. I want to be safe like everybody else in my home. I want to make sure that those kids that are growing up in my neighborhood, that they have opportunities to recognize the American dream. I want to make sure that when we're doing immigration, we're doing it smart and we're not letting bad folk in, but instead we're making sure that those people that have real asylum cases or whatever contributions they're trying to make to our country, that those are the ones that are getting in. And frankly, I think it's abysmal that we have lost 1.1 million jobs, and it's not even been a year since this administration has been in. I also think that it is terrible that on my launch day, I had a mother come to me and say, I was going to send my son to you to see if he could get a Service Academy nomination. But under this administration, I am scared to send my son into the service, and all he wants to do is serve our country. But as a mother, I am scared because I don't trust the people at the top to do what's right and do right by my son. That is a shame.
Mm. Democratic primary voters, though, are going to see you and James Tallarico on the ballot first. What would you tell them? 'Cause I've read a lot of online chatter who say, why in the world are the two best Democrats in this state running against each other? How are you most different from him?
I think it's probably experience. At this point in time, I think everyone will agree that we're living in unprecedented times, and let's hope that we never have times like this again. But we know that I've been on the state level. We know that I currently serve on the federal level. And by the time we get through this election, it would have been about approximately 4 years. This is a big job. And so I think that there's more question marks. There's tons of receipts for who I've been on the federal level, for what my advocacy will look like. And regardless of what people try to say or how they try to paint me, the facts are the facts, right? We know for a fact that I've actually worked across the aisle. We know for a fact that prior to entering into this very competitive primary, our senator had nothing but good things to say about me. Me and Senator Cornyn have worked together on things where we could find common ground. Senator Cornyn made it clear that when I got to Congress, if there was something that I felt like was smart and good for Texans, that I should come to him. I should not look for a Democrat on the Senate side. And so we've worked on fentanyl legislation together. We've worked on food security bills together. And frankly, I've worked with other Republicans to make sure that we got an ARPA H location into my district in 30. It was Kay Granger, who was the Republican chair of appropriations, that helped me kind of co-lead this effort to bring together Republicans in our region. So, there are documents and letters showing that I have worked together for what was good for Texas. And it was only Texas. Texas was the only red state that ended up getting one of those ARPA H locations. And what that meant was investments right there in Texas 30. What it meant was diversity in our trials. What it meant was exploring and trying to make sure that we were ready and prepared, hopefully, for the next pandemic that hopefully is not coming too soon. These are the things that I've done. Like, this is just the record. Those are not the things that actually go viral. And so I think that when it comes down to it, when people are like, should we take a chance or should we go with what we know? I think that that's really the biggest difference. I don't think, obviously I worked with James on the state level. And so it's been a while since we've worked together. But I think that that's really the biggest difference. And I think beyond that, you have someone who has a lot higher name ID. My name ID is close to twice as high as James Tallarico's name ID. And so with that, we are going into a race where I personally believe we have to expand the electorate. But if the basic electorate, which is where we're getting the name ID numbers from, if they don't know who you are, I don't know how you then go beyond that and go and grab up other people. We can do this, but it is going to take a heavy lift. And the final point that I'll make is, like I have traveled this country on behalf of Democrats everywhere. I have never put self first. I have always put what mattered most to the American people first. That includes campaigning in California for Prop 50. That includes campaigning in Pennsylvania to make sure that they retain their judges just in case something goes crazy and we have to have election cases that go up to them. That means making sure that I campaigned in Virginia for Abigail Spanberger. That means that I went into Florida and tried to get Debbie Murkowski across the finish line in Florida for the Senate. And I could go on and on and on and on. Well, what has happened is that I've put in a lot of goodwill. And so instead of just relying on those in Texas to help us organize and make those phone calls and potentially get on doors, I've already, part of me waiting, so to speak, I was working. We're going to call it my working period. We're not going to call it my waiting period. I was calling and I was asking people, I was asking elected officials all over this country, if I do this, we have the earliest primary. Our primary, is at the beginning of March, along with Arkansas. It's just the two of us. So I was like, listen, people will need something to do. Can you agree that you will get your volunteers to help us out in Texas? And so I have some of those assurances. And so I am able to expand the organizing effort beyond just Texas. But absolutely, we're going to go in, we're going to get Texas fired up, in addition to making sure that the rest of the country understands how important this seat is to our democracy as a whole, and therefore gets involved.
Colin Allred dropped out of the race for Senate. Do you plan to reach out to him to ask for his endorsement?
I will let you know. I feel like you're trying to get into my conversations. I'm not going to tell you.
Did you have a conversation?
You'll know what you know when you know it, is what I'm going to tell you on that one.
Have you had a conversation with him?
I will tell you that Colin Allred and I have been friends for quite some time. And so we've had multiple conversations as things have played out in general. I'm gonna leave it at that, because one thing that I don't ever do. So when there's reports about things that have happened, unless they can cite myself or the other person on the other line, chances are the reports are false. But I don't go against someone and betray their confidences. So I'll just say that I've had multiple conversations with Colin Allred about various things.
Before I let you go, I want to ask your thoughts on Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's had a mea culpa. She has, she's not running again. She's been critical of President Trump, something that a lot of people thought they'd never see. You famously clashed with her multiple times. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, maybe we can team up. Maybe I can get her to Texas, since we seem to be on the same team now. No, I think it's really telling. I think what we see is that the walls are crumbling around the president. We know that Marjorie has been one of the fiercest, most loyal supporters of the president in all ways. And for her to feel as if she should go against him, it has to be really, really bad. This is someone who took on our former president, sitting on the floor in the State of the Union and having a MAGA hat and trolling him and doing all these things. But I think that people should not forget who Marjorie has always been. Number one, I want you to always remember who she's been. But I do think that it is important for people to understand the political violence element. This is the part of this that I don't want to be downplayed. As people are like, oh, why run and this and that and whatever, it is a real sacrifice, because when you put yourself out there and when you are brave enough and confident enough to stand up to arguably the most powerful person in the world and tell him he's wrong when he is, right? Most people aren't telling him he's wrong, not because they believe he's right, but because they're scared. And so once Marjorie got on his bad side, she started to feel what it's like to be me every single day. And so while she's not ushered in an apology directly to anyone, she has kind of seemingly said that she regretted any role that she played in this, because being a fierce and loyal supporter and allowing this type of vitriol to play out in the way that it's played out, I've never disclosed a lot of things that have happened to me. But I look at the hate that is thrown at me and I think about, what that means, that I am actually effective. That means that I am doing something. And so I'm not going to back down. When people were kind of trying to do things to keep me out of this race, I remember having a conversation with someone that will most likely be on my staff. And I said, these people have no idea who they're talking to. I'm like, the more you taunt me, the more that it tells me that that's exactly where I'm supposed to be. So I think that it is important, no matter if you are red or blue or independent, I think it is important that we understand that when Marjorie and Jasmine Crockett are saying the same thing about what happens when you're on the other side of Donald Trump, you should probably believe us, because there's not much that we actually agree upon. And I think it's important that while the tone is set at the top, I think it's important, because of the tone that has been set at the top, that we down here start to set an example for him to follow.
Congresswoman, it's good to see you. Thank you for the time.
Thanks, Jason.